A journalist disappears after exposing corruption. Another is found days later in a remote area under disturbing circumstances, and a government insider walks out the door but is never seen again. These are more real people who vanished after exposing dark secrets. Elena Holmberg was an Argentine diplomat born in 1931. She worked her way up through the foreign service and became one of the first women to graduate from the country's main diplomatic school. By the late 70s, she was posted in France, working at the embassy. In 1978, she was suddenly called back to Buenos Aires after issues with naval intelligence officers she'd been dealing with. Well, once she got back, she was working inside the foreign ministry as usual. On December 20th, 1978, she left the building during the day saying she was going to meet a group of journalists. She never made it to that meeting. She was taken off the street by a military task force. At the time, Argentina was under a military dictatorship, and people were being picked up like this all over the country. Holmberg was taken to a secret detention center run by the Navy, where prisoners were held and interrogated. On January 11th, 1979, her body was pulled from a river just outside the city. It had been there for a while before anyone found it. People started pointing fingers at the high-ranking Navy officers. It was pretty obvious she'd been unalived after uncovering things she wasn't supposed to see. Mauro De Mauro was an Italian investigative journalist. By 1970, he was working for a newspaper in Palermo, digging into big stories about crime and corruption. He'd already made enemies over the years with pieces exposing organized crime. One of the things he was working on in September 1970 was a research project about a powerful Italian energy boss who died in a plane crash under very suspicious circumstances. De Mauro was convinced there was more to that crash than anyone had been told, and he was chasing leads. On the evening of September 16, 1970, he left work and walked home in Palermo, but he never made it inside. Men grabbed him off the street and he disappeared. Thousands of police and investigators searched Sicily, but they never found his body. His disappearance became one of the most talked about mysteries in modern Italian history. Over the decades, different theories have come up about why he vanished, and almost all of it has to do with him finding out too much. But decades later, there's still no definite answer, and his remains yet to be found. Alexander Perepilichny was a Russian businessman who got caught up in one of the biggest corruption scandals in Russia. He'd worked in finance and later became a whistleblower, helping expose a scheme where billions of dollars were being siphoned out of Russia through fake companies and moved into Swiss accounts. This case had already led to the death of Sergei Magnitsky, the lawyer who'd uncovered it. So Perepilichny knew he was dealing with extremely dangerous people, but he continued his work, passing documents to Swiss authorities and other investigators trying to follow the money. In 2009, he moved to the UK with his wife and children, hoping to stay safe, and for a few years, he seemed to have escaped the danger. But on November 10, 2012, while out jogging near his home in southern England, he suddenly collapsed. He died at just 44 years old. At first, police said it must have been a heart-related issue, but it was much more disturbing than that. Toxicology tests later found traces of a rare plant-based chemical. It wasn't possible to definitively prove that he'd been poisoned, but given what he'd been involved in, it would make sense. As for how they'd have managed to poison him, that's the unsettling part. Who the hell knows? Even years later, his death is still a mystery. Ross Alderson is, or maybe was, an Australian who was living in British Columbia, Canada. He spent years working for the British Columbia Lottery Corporation, starting in 2008 as an investigator focused on stopping money laundering in casinos. Over the next 7 years, he worked his way up, eventually becoming the director of anti-money laundering investigations. He held that director position until he resigned in October of 2017. During his time there, Alderson repeatedly raised concerns about money laundering in casinos and tried to push the issue internally. As he moved up, Alderson started having health problems. Some colleagues said he seemed under a lot of stress, and there was also talk that he might have been dealing with mental health issues. Despite this, he was willing to help with a commission of inquiry in British Columbia in late 2019. He told reporters it was necessary and that he was willing to help. But when he was summoned to appear, he never showed up, and nobody could get in contact with him. He's been missing ever since. No one knows if he moved back to Australia or if something more serious happened. Now we're going way back. William Morgan was an ordinary guy living in upstate New York in the 1820s. He worked various jobs: stonecutter, bricklayer, storekeeper. He wasn't famous or important before 1826, but his life changed when he announced he was going to publish a book that would reveal the secrets of the Freemasons. Morgan wasn't a complete outsider to Freemasonry. He convinced local Masons that he'd been initiated, but some members started questioning whether he was really a member or not, and rejected him. This pushed him to team up with a newspaper publisher to write a book exposing what went on inside that secret organization. When word got out about this, Masons were obviously not happy. In September 1826, Morgan was arrested on minor, highly questionable charges, like failing to repay a tiny debt, but he was conveniently thrown in jail before his book could be published. Shortly after being released from jail, he was taken away by a group of men and never seen again. His body was never found. At the time, there were protests. People demanded answers. They were outraged by this. The case was never solved. So this one's deeply unsettling. Francis Nyauri was a freelance journalist in Western Kenya, known for digging into corruption and shady dealings by police and government officials. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance in January 2009, he'd published a series of articles exposing financial scams and fraud involving local police officers, including issues with a housing project meant for officers. People that he wrote about started threatening him, and friends said he'd started getting nervous about going out alone. Well, on the morning of January 15th, 2009, Nyauri left his home saying he was going to buy construction materials. Then that was the last time his wife or anyone else saw him alive. 2 weeks later, on January 29th, his body was discovered in Kodera Forest, far from his home. His hands were tied behind his back. His head had been separated from his body. Investigators later found that a taxi driver had driven Nyauri with 2 police officers and some local gang members. The driver said that Nyauri was beaten and taken into the forest, where of course he was unalive. Now, arrests were made and there was a trial, but infuriatingly, no one was ever convicted. Sandeep Kothari was a journalist in Madhya Pradesh. The months before he disappeared, he put out stories exposing this huge illegal iron ore operation, naming people and companies involved. After those reports, he started getting threats, but he kept doing his work. On June 26, 2015, he went out in a busy part of town to run errands, and he never came back. Witnesses later said that a group of men forced him into a car, and of course, he was reported missing right away. 2 days later, on June 28th, his body was found near a creek outside the city. The case has been dragging on ever since. At this point, for 11 years. There have been 3 arrests, but so far, no actual convictions, but the case is still ongoing. David Kelly was a British scientist who worked for the government as an expert on biological weapons. He'd spent years inspecting weapons programs and was considered one of the top people in his field. In 2003, not long after the Iraq War began, a BBC report came out claiming the British government had exaggerated intelligence about weapons of mass destruction to justify going to war. That report caused a huge political fight between the government and the BBC. Behind the scenes, Kelly had spoken off the record with a journalist connected to that story. His name eventually got out. Once that happened, everything escalated. On July 15th, 2003, he was called in and grilled in front of Parliament about what he'd told the BBC. 2 days later, on July 17th, he left his home in Oxfordshire and went for a walk, and he didn't come back. The next day, his body was found in a wooded area nearby. Supposedly, he'd taken his own life, but I mean, come on. He'd just been exposed as the source in this major political scandal, questioned on live television, and within days he's gone? Highly suspicious is an understatement. Evany José Metzker was a Brazilian blogger who ran his own site where he wrote about crime, local politics, and of course, corruption. In early 2015, he'd been working on stories about dealing of illicit substances and the exploitation of minors. He'd been staying in a small town for a while, digging into it and trying to get more information. People who knew him later said he'd been getting threats because of what he was looking into. He was last seen around May 13th, 2015, and after that, he just disappeared. A few days later, on May 18th, his body was found in a remote area after police got an anonymous tip. And there was no question as to how he died. It was gruesome to say the least. He was missing his head, and the lead up to that wouldn't have been pleasant either. Whoever did this was sending a very clear message. To this day, no arrests have been made. That's been the video for today. I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.